Live events aren't just nice to haves. They're proven to be the highest ROI activity a company can invest in. They build stronger teams, accelerate trust, and create the kind of culture no email or Zoom call ever will. In today's remote and digital world, people are craving that connection more than ever. My guest today is Wendy Porter, a powerhouse in the live event space with over 2 decades of experience designing high-impact experiences for some of the biggest brands in the world. She's here to show us how leaders can stop treating events as a cost center and start treating them as one of the most powerful leadership tools in their toolkit. Welcome to the No Limits Leadership Podcast. We discuss ancient wisdom, real-world experiences, and the latest concepts on mastering leadership of self and others. If you're committed to maximizing your life and your impact on the world, you're home. Welcome to No Limit Leadership. This is your host, Sean Patton, and my guest today is Wendy Porter. She is a force in the live events world with over 2 decades of experience creating unforgettable, high ROI experiences for some of the biggest brands on the planet. She's the founder of Wendy Porter Events, an award-winning strategic events agency and a sought-after fractional head of events for high-growth companies who want results, not just parties. She's also the vice chair of government affairs for the Live Event Coalition, lobbying and informing our policymakers about the live events industry. Wendy's led everything from national sales meetings and leadership retreats to community impact activations and brand launches. Her mission? To prove that live events aren't a cost center, they're a trust accelerator, a culture builder, and your most underleveraged leadership tool. Wendy, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Sean, thanks for having me.
Wendy, we met when I was speaking at an event at Titan Stadium in Nashville, which was awesome, by the way. Like, what a cool event space, and used really well. And we hit it off very well and kind of found ourselves in kind of a corner, just like chatting it up, and decided we need to have you on here and specifically talk about not just your experience and leadership. We'll get into all that, but also a topic that we have not had or talked about on this podcast enough, which is the power of connection and live events and how to do them, how not do them. Also, one of the things that really struck me when we had our conversation was when you talked about how live events can be one of the highest ROI activities that business leaders can do. Why is that?
It's actually the highest ROI channel that you can have now. We've actually got research on that now. So back in the day when I was doing events inside of corporate, I was always sort of fighting for my job and fighting for my existence and the events that we did, and we never really had the data. And so it was always that gut, that intuition that these are important, these are right, we need to be doing this, but we never had the data to back it up. And now we actually have a lot of data. So we have a lot of research now that is telling us that is the number one channel for both ROI and building trust. We now have methods to capture data at events so that we can prove it on the back end and actually calculate that ROI, right? And show the CFOs how much it matters. And we also know that 25% of marketing budgets right now are being allocated to events. So people are prioritizing it. It leapfrogged over digital. So it is the best channel right now for ROI. And so people really do need to be prioritizing them and doing them well.
Why do you think it is? Why is it the highest
It's
ROI?
the human connection, right? I think, and especially coming back from COVID, I think people were starved for that. So for 2+ years, right, we were all hunkered down and doing everything digitally. And we realized, I think, the importance of that human connection. And really, how do you build trust, right? Yes, you can somewhat build trust over digital, like what you and I are doing right now. But to really build that relationship, you really need that in-person human connection, face to face.
That's so true. I'm on my organizational leadership side. When I do organizational leadership development with companies, I'm constantly looking at new models and like the core foundations of leadership. And what I've come down to, it's interesting you bring up trust, is I think that a strong leadership culture comes down to, I'm coining now the holy trinity of leadership culture, and it's trust, communication, and growth. But it starts with trust. And I see it with my wife's company, who's fully remote, and other companies that are in that hybrid remote environment. And I think there's such a difference between companies that can integrate in-person connection with a remote or hybrid workforce. I think it really starts with what I'm calling the holy trinity of a strong leadership culture, which is trust, communication, and growth. But it starts with trust. And, I see that with my wife's company, who's fully remote, and others in the industry that are, remote or hybrid or have distributed teams. I just don't think you can create that type of trust interaction without some type of in-person interaction at some point in the year, right?
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
100%. So we've done a lot of that work actually, where we're doing all hands events for remote teams and bringing them together at least once a year, right? And doing an all company meeting offsite somewhere. And we really are very careful in how we program it. So it's not just about company updates; those are important, but it's also about some downtime, so that those teams can huddle together and go off and sit around the fire pit or go play pickleball in the afternoon, or give them some time to really go off and bond with their smaller departmental teams, because they don't get to see each other in person. So yeah, hugely important.
That's what I love. You had a quote in some of your content that said, people don't remember the number of attendees; they remember how the event made them feel. So plan accordingly.
Right.
So if you're a company that's trying to do that, that's because there's different types of events, but we're talking about a company that's doing maybe an intra-company event, those offsites with a remote or distributed team. What, in terms of programming, should they be doing? What helps create and build that trust? And then maybe what do people do that is sort of a waste of time or even counter to that?
Yeah. So I have something at my company that we call the Ruby Ribbon Experience Strategy. Okay. So it's the Ruby Ribbon, like the red thread, right? You've heard of that concept, the red thread that ties everything together. So, and this isn't just for all, offsite, all hands meetings. This is for any event that you're doing, right? The strategy applies. So it starts from the very first touch point, right? So take the all hands meeting. What we did with that one was we started with our keynote speaker who was coming in. She was actually serving as our MC of the event as well. So she was going to be the host of the event throughout. And so we started actually with her doing a video up front saying, hey, everybody, here's who I am. I'm going to be seeing you in Arizona. Get ready for 3 days of action-packed information, blah, 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 right? And so she did this little video so people got to get excited and start to get to know her. And that was sort of the first touch point. And then we followed up with a series of videos with her. So I think she did 2 or 3 before we even got on site, so people knew who she was. And we threaded what she said through everything we wanted them to do. So, hey, it's time to register. Go in and click that button, and get all your information in. Or, hey, you're flying in 2 days. Don't forget to read the know before you go. There's really important information in there, right? So helping to kind of guide them along to what we wanted them to do, right? So then when they showed up on site, they already knew her. She was a familiar face when they walked in the room. We created energy when they first walked in. People are always concerned about budgets, and does it have to be super expensive to do something impactful? No, it doesn't. So what we did was I took my leadership team, which was 10 people that, they're all remote, this entire team. And I gave them all different colors of pom-poms. And I said, you're going to stand at the door, at the entrance of the door, like a football tunnel. And you're going to clap and you're going to wave the pom-poms and you're going to high five and you're going to greet people as they walk in the door. And we had energetic music. And that cost me $8 to buy the pom-poms, right? And so, people came in the door and they're like, whoa, what is going on here? But they loved it because they felt like they got a personal greeting by their leadership team, right? They got to see them, give them a hug, whatever. So that's how we started it off. And then throughout, we really made sure that our content was broken up. So really using neuroscience for how you retain information, not having an hour-long session because nobody can sit and listen for an hour, right? You need to make sure you're breaking up the content, thinking about TED Talks, how those are structured, right? They're 18 minutes or 13 minutes for a reason because you can't focus longer than that. So making sure that whatever content we were delivering, we had either a break or some sort of action, or people were standing up and moving tables, or they were doing some sort of conversation at the table, right? Just really building out the content throughout the day so that it could be absorbed as best as it could be, thinking about neurologically, right? We also had an engagement tool that we used. It was like a mobile app. It was actually web-based, but that started ahead of time as well. So we had this thing called the Gab wall. It's basically their version of Facebook. So it was like, hey, take a photo when you get on the airplane, when you're headed out to Arizona, and say hi. And so people were starting to engage before they even got there by posting photos at the airport and as they were traveling and when they got on site. And so we started that interaction really at the very beginning of the whole thing. And then we carried that through all the way to the end. And we made sure that we were really intentional, like I said, with breaks, that we gave them a few hours off in the afternoon to decompress, think about what they just heard, go off and take a nap if they needed to, go get with their teams, go to the spa, go shopping, whatever, that they got some basically reward time, right? To go do whatever they wanted to do while they were in this beautiful location. So it was a combination of information, company updates, bonding with their team, but also sort of a reward, right? For being a great employee and coming to this beautiful place and then getting some free time to do what they wanted. So we tried to kind of blend all of that together to make it a really great experience. That they went home, they had a fantastic memory and, more loyalty towards the company. So
no, I love that. I think, excuse me, I think that one of the initial sort of like pitfalls of like an inexperienced or, not professional event planner or someone who's just like, yeah, put together an event is this thought of like, I need to cram as much as I can into the time. It's like people are only here for 2 days. Like,
yep.
I've been to those conferences, right? Where it's like you get there at like 7:30 and you're just like going till the evening, and then there's the after part and the drinks, and you're just like,
that's a bad idea.
Exhausted.
It's a bad idea because that's exactly right. You're exhausted, right? So we call it moment planning. So you're planning for moment to moment to moment, not cramming as much in as you can. Yeah, that's just not the way to do it today. It's not what people want.
What would you say then? So that was a great example of, and you mentioned it's kind of the same for different types of events, but for a on-site or a intra-company event, what about how does that change, or what are some best practices around conferences, right, or conventions and that sort of thing, where you have that are around an industry or an idea, or you have multiple vendors? Like, how does that change the way you plan in order to maximize the value for the participants?
Yeah, great question. We actually produced a large conference here in Minneapolis back in 2023. It was actually for NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And it was their annual conference, which happened to be happening in Minneapolis. And so we had a general session. We had a large trade show component. We had all these breakouts going on. We had separate meetings happening, like their board was in town and they had, different groups of people, alliance groups, right, that they bring together. So the young professional group, or the LGBTQ group, or the Jewish group, or we had all these different sort of alliance groups that were also meeting. So it was a complicated program, but I think it's about designing for what people want personally, right? So we had so many different options that people could pick from that aligned with what was important to them. So if you wanted to get with the community, the LGBTQ community, we had a way for you to do that. If you wanted to go network with the young professionals group, we had a way to do that, right? So it was making sure that we were really intentional so that we had options for people. We also had a couple quiet rooms for neurodivergent people that needed to get away, right? So we were intentional about creating a space for people to go upstairs, away from the floor, away from the noise, sit in a quiet, dimmed room, dim lights, beautiful furniture in there, plants, comfortable food, they could just have a few snacks, soft music, whatever. They could just sit in there and just decompress and calm down. We also had a second room where if someone was really given this was a mental health community, right? And we had people there with lived experience. We also had counselors on hand. So if someone was going into an anxiety attack and they needed to talk to somebody, we had somebody there to assist them. So we were really, really proactive in thinking through the needs of the audience and how we were going to design that. We also tried to do a lot of surprise and delight type things. So on the trade show floor, we had a horse activation. So one of the people on my team, she said, I know a horse therapy group here in the Twin Cities. Should we bring horses to the event? And I'm like, yeah, we should.
Heck
right?
yeah. I mean, we never say no to horses at the trade show. Nobody says that.
Right. So, just thinking big, right? And sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that end up being the coolest. And was it complicated to get horses on the show floor in the Minneapolis Convention Center? Yes, it was. We had to get a hoof permit, and, we had to think about
I have to be honest. I've done a lot of stuff with government. I've never heard of the hoof permit. I didn't know it was a hoof permit.
Hoof permit in Minneapolis for any hoofed animals. You have to have a permit. And just all the complexities that went along with that. But we had horses, and people loved it. And these were actual therapy horses that do work with, therapy work with people. So, we were just, trying to be really creative with the activations that we did and make it different. So we ended up getting a BizBass award for that program, which was pretty cool. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So when you look at, holistically across those, why do some events, or what makes some events really succeed versus others fall flat, even if they've got big budgets?
Yeah. Again, I think it's that focus on the individual, trying to get it personalized so that people show up and feel like there's something there for them, right? They're not just in a cattle call, just moving along with the crowd, right? There's something there that resonates with them on an individual basis that they can take back with them that resonates and creates that memory.
Is there something I'm thinking now about the company events? A lot of the people that are listening, a lot of the audience members are leaders inside companies or founders. What I have seen and been to some conferences where it almost is like, this is just the time for senior leadership to get on stage and feel good about themselves and put out information that could have been in an email or in a Zoom meeting. But I think one of the great uses of this is to help reinforce and create culture inside of a company. Like what makes this company different? Mm-hmm. And can you think of any examples or ideas to give these leaders, how do they, if they've got a remote or distributed team, and this is maybe their only chance where everybody gets together and they want to be like, we've been talking about this culture thing and trying to reinforce it virtually, but like, we want to really embody that right now. Like how can they do that?
Yeah. So we have sort of a mantra: if you can do it on Zoom, don't do it in the room.
Powerful. Right? Yes.
If you can deliver that content over Zoom, do it over Zoom. Don't spend the money to bring all those people together to do what you could do in Zoom. Right. So again, it's about creating some sort of engaging content. So not just standing up as a talking head on stage and delivering that content, breaking it down and asking questions and creating table exercises where you're getting the group to talk to each other and, being open to hard questions. Because a lot of times people want to ask hard questions, but they're afraid, right? And so they hold back. You have to be open, I think, to letting the group engage with you and ask the questions that they would like to see answered, right? And being open to that and being transparent and being honest, being available to the teams. What I really hate seeing is when an exec comes in, they do their stage thing, and then they take off. They need to stay at the event and be at the dinner and be at the happy hour and, be at the social responsibility event that you're doing where you're packing food and, like engage with your teams. We had, when I was inside of corporate, one of our best CEOs was that kind of guy. Like he was there. Like he showed up one day on the trade show floor where we were unpacking a bunch of tchotchkes for the day and refilling all the bins and getting ready for the show open. And he's like, he looked around and he saw all these boxes and stuff. And he's like, oh, is this what happens every day? Like, yeah, because he'd never really thought about that, like all the stuff that goes in behind the scenes, right? So he saw us all unpacking and scurrying around and doing stuff. He said, well, how can I help? And he just jumped right in and he was unpacking boxes and slitting them open and, right in there with the team. And that's an amazing leader. I mean, people would have walked in front of a bus for that guy because he was so well loved because he really cared about the people and he engaged with the team. Right. So I think it's about that.
Another reason I'm just thinking now of the power behind live event with those senior leaders is, I always say that, your actions as a leader will speak volumes over your words, right? So like how you show up, what actions you take, how you treat people, those things matter more in terms of people wanting to follow you, which definition of leader, right, is that people want to follow you. I mean, it's kind of as simple as it wants. People try to complicate this like leadership concept around like, well, it's this and that. It's just like, if other people, if you're, that's one of my favorite quotes on leadership from John Adams I learned back at West Point and stuck with me today is, if your actions inspire others to dream more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. So what a perfect situation. And you talked about ROI before this of like, that half hour that CEO spent where everybody else saw the CEO, hey, we're all in this together. He's unpacking boxes. Like what's the leverage point on that? Like what's the ROI on that half hour of his time? Because I'm not sure there's too many other things he could have done that would have given him a bigger ROI on impacting that company and getting people to want to follow him.
And he set the tone, right? His expectation was that his leadership was there. Like we're at this event, we're spending a lot of money to be at this event. This back in the day, this was for AARP. So AARP had their really large Life at 50 Plus event that they would do every year, which was their national conference. So it would get like 25,000 people to come. And this was back when I was at United Healthcare. And we were a top level sponsor of that event. And that relationship was super important, and it still is to UHC, right? And the people who were that were coming to that event were customers, and they mattered to United, right? And so our CEO was like, I'm working the booth, and so are all of you. And so we had 30 executives that rotated in that booth for 3 days. They were all on the floor. And so, I'd have things come up like, someone would walk in and have a customer service problem or something happening. And I probably had the head of that division standing in the booth. And so we take them over and say, here's your guy. This is who you need to talk to. And, they could hear first, front and center from the customers of what was going on with their experience with the company. And it was, it was amazing.
And I'll call out here again for people listening that, we're talking about this ROI of live events, the power of, especially in a company that large, the larger the company, the more powerful, how far away from the customer, from like the tactical operations of a company, those senior leaders are, right? Like, if you're in a big healthcare company, like how often are you listening direct from the consumer or the client or the customer? Or if you're in healthcare, like how often are you in the room and hearing patients complain, like almost never. Right. And by the time it gets to you, it's played the telephone game, who knows what's what, everybody's put their spin on it. But the value of like having that day to hear directly to inform your strategic decisions at the tactical level, man, another ROI of live events right there.
Yep. Yeah, the people get super excited when they find that out. Like, wow, you're the CEO, really?
Yeah. I mean, how hard would it be if our customer tried to get to the VP of some division at United Healthcare? Otherwise, like you're not. That's that email's not getting forwarded too fast. So what are some other common blind spots you see when executives delegate events and event planning without understanding the strategy behind them?
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of that example where they just don't know what goes into it, right? They're not sitting in the trenches. And so I think it's important for every leader for at least once to sit at the table with the planning team that's doing the event so that they can understand the 1,000-line project plan that actually goes into that event, right? You think about a trade show, when we show up, it's a blank concrete floor. There's nothing there. And by the time the executives walk in, it's this beautiful booth and everything's set up and all the technology's going and, it's beautiful. And they have no clue that it took us 5 days to build that, right? So I think it's important that they sit at the table at least once to understand what goes into it because they have a whole new perspective and respect for what goes into it. I also think they need to be careful not to just lob it to the person who has some extra time. That happens way too often where it's like, oh, we need to do this event. So-and-so has some extra time right now. Just give it to them. That's a mistake because there's a lot that goes into being a professional event organizer. There's a lot of mistakes that can be made and money wasted when you give it to somebody who doesn't really know how to do it, right? They don't know to push back on, cost $14,000 to vacuum. You might want to push back on that a little bit and find out a different way so you don't pay $14,000 to vacuum your booth. Not kidding. That's how much it costs to vacuum our booth. So I found a different way, because it had to be union. So I had a truck driver. We had a semi that was in our booth. Our booth was 13,000 square feet, if you can wrap your head around that. So I had an 80-foot semi trailer in my booth that we had to figure out how to get that on the floor. And that was our mobile clinic. So we would do health screens and we did a telemedicine demonstration in there at one point. We did a lot of different things in that rig. But the driver of that rig was union. So guess what he did? He vacuumed my booth for me. Because if anyone came after me and said, well, there has to be a union guy, I can say, he is a union guy. Maybe he isn't your union guy, but he's a union guy. And he's vacuuming the booth. It didn't cost me $14,000.
Wow. So, yeah, just one example, right, of doing that. That is really interesting. So we talked a lot about some different types of events there. Another one would be those smaller, like leadership retreats. What are the best ones to get right?
Oh, gosh. Again, it's that intentionality, right? On how you're programming it, making sure it's not too big, making sure you have enough space in the day for people to have time to breathe and really think about what they just heard. Club Ichi, the event that we went to in Nashville, I think they do it. I think they're brilliant in how they create engagement, right? With letting the group sort of define what we're going to talk about, right? That first night is the ideation. Like, what are the hot buttons right now? What do you want to talk about? And letting people really put that out there. I think that is a great way to do it in today's world because people want to talk to fellow colleagues that have similar situations and figure out how they're navigating stuff and how they're tackling things, right? So I think on a leadership retreat, some of that, you probably want to have some parts that are prescribed and, defined before you get there, but also some open space to let's tackle some issues. Let's put it up on a board and figure out what are the hot buttons and prioritize those and talk about those things as a group, right? I think that's a really good way to do it today. And we're seeing really the most effective events that we're seeing right now are these small events. That's where people are prioritizing right now. Instead of spending the big bucks to go to the big trade shows, they might go to the trade show, but they're not necessarily doing a booth. They're doing an after hours networking event with key people that are attending that conference. They can still talk to the people they need to talk to, but they're not necessarily having to invest in that show floor experience, right? So, just because budgets are so tight right now and everything's gotten so expensive, people are having to do things differently. And we're seeing a lot of that right now.
When they're looking at doing leader retreats, is that something where you hire, is there specific event professionals that just do that? Is that, I know like in the coaching space and executive, like there's a lot of people who kind of do that too in their own way, or they're professional facilitators, that sort of thing. So, who do they know where to go to, and when do they know when they need to go to a professional for a small event like that versus maybe do it in house?
Honestly, I would say anytime you're doing an event, you should be consulting with a professional. I truly believe that. From all the way from negotiating the contract at the venue you're going to be at. There's a lot of potholes now with hotels. And that's gotten worse than ever since COVID. They're trying to recover money. I just think you really need a professional for any kind of event that you're doing, honestly, at least a consultant. You could have the internal team execute on it, but you should at least be consulting with somebody who knows how to do it to avoid some of the potholes. Let's put it that way. And it's going to storm here. Can you tell it's gotten green outside now?
Yeah, that's crazy.
My face is green now. Okay.
There's some weather going on in Minneapolis. Well, and we've mentioned ROI, and we started this talk talking about how live events are, the number one ROI marketing spend. So if a leader says, all right, so going into this, we start planning, what are those key ROI levers? What are the metrics and the measurables that we're showing ROI on this? Like, what should they be looking in? Are there ways to sort of set a baseline before and post event to see that? Like, what sort of metrics are we looking at here when we say ROI?
Right. Great question. So that starts at the beginning. So as you're concepting an event, one of the first things you need to do is define your goals and objectives, right? So sit down and talk to that leader that's hosting that meeting and say, what are you really trying to get out of this? Tell me what success looks like to you, right? And you define those things, and then you figure out how can you measure against that. So are you doing a post-event survey? You should be. Everybody should be doing a post-event survey. Is it something where, if it's a customer that's coming into the retreat, let's say you're doing a user group or something, let's look at retention. Did you get a bump up in your retention numbers because you had this user conference? If you're at, if you're at a trade show, it's about, the leads that you're capturing and the follow-up after you go away from the event and how that translates into your downstream impact in your customer journey, right? So some of these things sort of have a long lifespan to measure. It depends on the event, and it's very specific by event. We also have technology now that can do some really interesting things. So there's some AI technology for facial recognition. I don't know if you've heard about this. It's called Zenus. Have you ever heard of Zenus?
I haven't. I've heard of different companies doing the AI recognition software. But I haven't heard of this.
It's AI, but it's agnostic. So if it was looking at you, it wouldn't know that it's you per se. It would know, okay, that's a female. She's between 40 and 50 years old. It has agnostic kind of demographic information about that person that they're looking at, right? But it can track things. So for example, if you use it at a trade show, it can track how many people actually did walk by your booth. It's actually going to count how many people it saw walking by your booth. It can tell, like, if you come into a space, where did you stop and spend time? So did you go over to that demo corner and spend a few minutes there? Or did you stop and look at a graphic? What resonated with you in that space? And likewise, you can do that during a session. So if you were a keynoter and you're on stage, you could have these cameras mounted so that you're watching the audience and you can see, at minute 3, when I did this, the audience had a reaction. The audience was engaged with something that I did. And you can correlate your presentation and your keynote to how the audience is reacting and then, maximize that next time around. So there's some really interesting data. So you could do something similar to that, like during a leadership retreat, you could have this data, this this camera, if you will, gathering data during certain sessions to help you really evaluate what resonated, what was a surprise and delight for the crowd, when you said X. So a lot of interesting ways now, but it's how you define it on the front end. You have to look at your goals and objectives and come up with what are we measuring, and then figure out the path to do that. And it's different by event.
Makes total sense. You've talked about in a lot of your content, and I can imagine that doing events in general, right? It's fast paced, it's full of surprises, things are changing, and talk about the ability to quickly pivot and lead and be creative. What can you do, or what have you done, or what can leaders do to become more flexible and responsive and handle when, at an event or just in another type of scenario when something doesn't go quite to plan? Like, what are some strategies even before that or during to prepare themselves so they can better react?
Yeah. So I think it's about maintaining composure, right? And calm, and going in sort of expecting that something's going to happen, because it probably will. Right? So if you go in with that mindset, okay, something's going to happen. And when it does, we got it. We'll figure it out. Right? I have a number of stories around that. I had a situation, again, this was way back before you could VPN into a system. Okay. So we had a keynote coming in from our company. This is again back to United Healthcare. And he comes flying into the booth. He's like, okay, so is my session all set, ready to go? Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, you brought your computer, right? And he's like, no. I'm like, yeah, you were supposed to bring your computer. And I had told him and his admin and whatever, and he didn't bring his computer. So we didn't have a session because it was supposed to be on his computer. Well, let me tell you, I didn't do that ever again. I had his session 16 ways from Sunday after that. I had it on CDs. I had it on flash drives. I had it on my hard drive. I had it, we had it many, many ways. But this is when I was kind of junior in my role and didn't really think that I had to have 16 backups. And I did, right? So anyway, he shows up, does not have his session. But luckily we had the handouts. We had printed the handouts. And so he goes into the room and he says, okay, well, we don't have the session for the screen today. And of course he blamed it on the production team, but it was him.
Of course.
And he said, we're just going to work off the handouts. And so what he did was he got off stage and he walked the audience kind of Phil Donahue style, right? With his microphone. And he'd be like, okay, we're on page 3 now, and he'd, ma'am, you need to switch the page, and so he'd make sure everybody was on the same page. And he walked around the audience and had a very engaging session, right? He came over to me afterwards and he said, well, that was actually the best session I've ever done. And I'm doing it that way from this point forward. So he, in the future, had his slide up on stage. He did have his slides up on the screen, but he came off stage. For every session he did after that, he would walk the room. That's how he delivered his content.
Wow. I'm thinking as a keynote speaker myself, how you have a handout with I do that often with especially smaller events where people have maybe a workbook or something to fill in, or something like that, and being able to walk around and do it like a keynote, but almost in a workshop style like that. That sounds like it would be super engaging.
It became super engaging. And then it led to all this other stuff. So then it led to, because then he started developing relationships with people in the audience, right? He's like, we should do a newsletter. He's like, and he was a doctor. His name was Reed. He's like, let's do a newsletter called Ask Dr. Reed. And so the next thing we're doing standing up a newsletter, and then digital was becoming a thing, and so then that became a way for people to engage with him and ask questions, and then that led to a book that he wrote called The Doctor in the Mirror: How You Have to Be Your Own Advocate. And then that led to PBS happened to walk in our booth one day and said, hey, we're thinking we'd like to do some content on PBS. Do you got any ideas? I'm like, yeah, I think you need to do The Doctor in the Mirror. And so he ended up getting a PBS show about The Doctor in the Mirror. So him coming off stage that day led to 4 different things in his career and in our programming. So you never know where things are going to go, and you have to be open to that. Right.
Right. So interesting, and we talked about, before when we met and before this, talking about you and leadership and all the different roles you've had, about how you grew up in a military family, right? Travel around. Are there would you say that growing up in a military family, because your father, right, was in the military? Sorry?
Yeah. West Point guy.
West Point. Yeah. Yep. Were there leadership lessons that you got from growing up in that environment that led to some of the success you've had in life or you've carried forward?
That's a great question. I've always been driven kind of on my own. That wasn't really my parents. They were always like, do the best you can. And I remember my mom coming into my room one night. She's like, "Would you just go to bed?" And I'm like, "No, I'm getting an A on this test. And no, I'm not going to bed." That was me driving me, not my mom. So she's like, "Get a B." I'm like, "No,
Unacceptable, Mom. Unacceptable.
I don't do B's." And they were both, successful, driven people, but I was even more so, I think. And that's just who I am. But I think for me, it was really more around kindness and service. Both my parents, my mom, being a military wife, she was constantly on the move and having to make new friends and, that life. And they were both just, and still, my mom still is just very much about service and helping others and treating everyone as an equal, so everyone's a human. We're all human. We all put our pants on the same way every day. Right. And so from the top level CEO all the way down to the guy vacuuming the carpet at 2:00 in the morning, right? Everyone's a human, and we need to treat everyone with, the same level of respect. And I had one of the people on my staff said that to me one time. We were out somewhere, and she goes, I love how you treat everybody the same, so whoever, someone comes to fill your water and you're nice to them and you say thank you. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, isn't that how you're supposed to be, And I don't think our world is necessarily like that. And I think my parents modeled that really well. So,
well, I love to hear that. And, it's funny how it's interesting, maybe not funny. It's interesting to me how when I meet or you talk with, I'm sure you find this too, you meet or talk with someone who, I'm generalizing, but was in the military or in a military family, right? And would they talk about how leadership, treating people with kindness, service, versus sort of the outward perception of military leadership,
right?
And how there's this tough disconnect. Yeah, the tough guy. I get that. I get a lot from people. I can tell they haven't been exposed to maybe a lot of military folks, or maybe a couple, but they weren't good representatives of the whole. Where they're like, well, but it's not like the military where you just like bark orders at people and they walk around and do whatever you say. And you'd be like, that is not how that goes down. That is not how things are run.
Right. You're like, you've been watching too many movies.
Yes, exactly. It's a very Hollywoodized version of like the Marine Corps or something.
Yeah.
Or, they're thinking of like basic training.
Right.
But I was actually having lunch just yesterday with retired general officer who was the group commander of the special forces group I was in, and it just, when you were talking, it just reminded me of that, right? Because he comes in, Greece, the server comes by, oh, no, thanks, man. I need a minute. Can I do anything for you? It's just the way that we treat. We're talking about how the military is, I think the U.S. military, it has leadership right as it can be. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One thing that I think the reason you see that is because in the military versus the civilian or regular, most businesses don't do this, where in the military, right, as you move up in leadership roles, they pull you off. They have the luxury of doing that, right? Before you go to the next job, they take you away. You go to a school for 6 months where they teach you how to do the next job, as opposed to, you mentioned that giving the vent to the person who just has nothing to do, like the young upstart person or the senior people being fired and moving up, instead of just like, oh, you've been here a while, next job. One day you do this, next day, now you're the next person. Good luck. Yep. There was no formal training of how to do that. And that's one of the things that I think, bringing it back to our conversation about the events industry, that as I, as a speaker, have gotten more involved with event planners, how that's one thing event planners do, like any other profession, right? Is there's continuing education and there's levels and there's certifications and there's licenses. There's a professionalism. There's a professionalism to event planners as they move up that is really investing in themselves and growing as a profession. I don't think most people know that. I don't think senior executives know that.
I think you're right. And I think that's a relatively newer thing. I fell into events. I didn't have this as on my radar as what I was going to do with my life at all. I was a marketing person. I was a math major, for Pete's sake. So I was a math major, which when I came out of school, the company that hired me, they hired a lot of math people because they wanted, people that could think through P&L analysis and that type of thing in the business that I was in. So I worked my way up in marketing. And so when I started at United, I was actually hired as a marketing acquisition manager. So I was doing direct mail and, marketing stuff. And my first year, the VP of marketing said, hey, we're doing this event. Here, Wendy, you're doing it. And she threw me a folder and, have at it. It was like baptism by fire, right? But it turns out I was good at it. And so then that became my path. And then they ended up creating a position. And, I became the head of events for the Medicare division of United. And I did that for 13 years. But I learned it by doing it. And I made a lot of mistakes my first couple of years because I didn't know what I didn't know. And nobody was teaching me. Right. Now there are programs to teach, and the CMPs and all these different certifications that you can get. Back then, that really was pretty new. And so most people my age fell into this. Now we have more of a pathway to the profession. And in fact, some of the work we're doing right now with the Live Events Coalition and with some other organizations out there is around training, because we're concerned about, there's this thing coming up called the silver resignation or retirement, because the average age right now in events is 54. So we've got a lot of people that are headed towards retirement, and they're either going to resign or retire. And we need that new influx of talent coming in, and there aren't a lot of pathways happening right now. So we're working hard to try to get programs in place, get training dollars in place, identify students early that we think have aptitude for this. Kind of thinking more like the European system, where kids are you're sort of determined early on which direction you're going to go. Are you headed towards the trades? Are you headed towards university? Right. So getting programs even in place all the way down to the high school level, so we can start to find those students that have the aptitude, especially for tech and other things, that might want to go into that path. And so that we have a concerted effort right now to get some programs in place and get some curriculum built and get that new generation coming in to the industry, because we're going to lose a lot of people here pretty quick.
You mentioned when you first started that you made a lot of mistakes and had to learn through those, as we all do, right? As we try to grow. What's one mistake that you hope this episode helps a leader avoid?
Well, I'll give you an example of one that happened to me. I mean, I think it's about planning, right? And it's about asking questions and acknowledging when you don't know something and asking somebody who does know something, right? It's okay. It's okay not to know, and it's okay to ask the question. There's no stupid questions. But my first year, that first trade show, I didn't know what I was getting into. I had never done this before. And, so we had all this stuff being shipped in, and I didn't know that you should consolidate shipments to save money, because there's something called drayage at trade shows, and they charge you by the box, basically. They charge you by weight. So for every 200 pounds, they're going to charge you X dollars. Okay. If you send in one box and it weighs 5 pounds, they're going to charge you for 200 pounds. I didn't know this. So we had all these shipments coming in from all these different departments, and they were all coming in, haphazardly, and the people at the convention were dropping them in weird places. And so I'm running around the show floor trying to find our boxes because they're not in our booth. And it was like, it was a nightmare. And I was going through all the tracking and just trying to find our stuff. So I learned from that one show that we're consolidating all of our stuff now. We're not doing that again. So now I had everything shipped in to our trade show company. I would literally go through every single box and itemize it, inventory it, put it on a pallet, and document which box was on which pallet so I could find stuff when it arrived on the other end, right? So we got a process around doing that got very tight and really optimized dollars. I didn't know I was wasting all this money until I had to live through it, right? So that's the kind of thing that you don't know when you're a junior, that if you just asked a question to somebody else that had done it before, you would have known that was not the way to do it. So.
Yeah, let go of ego, ask questions as a leader. And even if you are that, you mentioned the CEO earlier, right? Like even if you're that senior leader who walked in and was like, wait a minute, we have all these boxes here? Like, like it's a surprise. I think that's a great reminder that as leaders, no matter what level we're at, but having that, I kind of describe it as confident humility, I don't know everything, and that's okay. Right. I think a lot of times as leaders, sometimes we get to that point where we feel this pressure that we think our people expect us to be perfect or have all the answers. And the reality is, when you're on the other side of that, you don't expect other people to have, your leaders to have all the answers, but you do expect them to be open and to feedback and to ask the right questions, right, and to be considerate. And that's what we're looking for, to build trust in our leaders, to bring it back to trust, like we opened with,
right,
not faked perfection that we can all see through.
And, now as a business owner, I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. Right. And I know when I need to bring in experts on certain things, and I have my trusted network of people So when something comes up and I know that's not my forte, I'm asking this person that question, right? So developing that group of people around you that are your experts that you can tap, that's important too.
Well, and so, yeah, so we'll end with that because I think coming full circle back to as leaders, these, as you mentioned, you have the data that these live events and I think so much, you mentioned the connection, the trust. We're all, we've all got, 10,000 friends on Facebook, but have never been lonelier.
Right.
And as a society and
Yep.
and especially when people are, they're on their computer and pretty soon they're going to have smaller companies, but empowered with, people are going to be interacting with their own AI agents in the day and less with their coworkers. And so when they come together and people are craving that experience, that connection, and I really do think that people, that's what they're looking for, right? They're looking for experiences because we live so much in this digital fake world that when you have those events and you do them right, they can be so powerful. So when you say know what you're good and not good at, like one, whether it's a leadership retreat, an onsite, or a major conference, leaders need to be considering the impact of human connection and building trust and culture through live events. And we have professionals for that. And if you want to maximize, you're going to invest time and energy, right? You're going to put a lot of time and money into these things. And so if you want the ROI on it, we need to just raise awareness about how we need to get event professionals to be brought into these conversations so that businesses can get the ROI and move forward. And you're definitely one of those people. So if someone's looking for that or has more questions, where should they go to contact you?
Yeah. So the easiest place is just on my website. So wendyporterevents.com. And right on the homepage, if you scroll down, there's a form you can fill out to contact me and find some time to meet. And we offer a free 30-minute consultation for people. So if anyone needs to chat about a challenge you're facing or want to talk fractional or any kind of question, I'm always happy and open to talking to people.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy. As always, I love our conversations. I learned so much from you as a leader, and especially about the power of events for leaders in their own businesses. So thanks for this conversation. It's been awesome.
Same here. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks for being a part of the No Limit Leadership family. This isn't just a podcast. We're building a movement of no limit leaders driven to unlock our greatness and lead the world forward. If this made you think or gave you something useful, please, 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 right now, go hit follow and then share it with one leader you believe in. Challenge limits, develop leaders, fuel greatness.